What came down, I think, what appeared were those words, slow bacchanal. That was the prize, that was the treasure. I just had to figure out what to do with it, find out what it wanted, what images it was making, what the story was that was hidden in the words. So that's why I write, to reach the state where that can happen, and then to see if I can still find my way in and out of that cave. But of course, there's more to it than that, or anyway, another version of the same story. Writing is not only an odd craft at keeping company with ghosts giving you songs and visitations giving you words. People may say to other people or to themselves that they want to become a writer, as if it's a status or a profession where you get a degree and then you're a writer. Writers write, they can't help it, they can't not. At some point defeated, without readers or without a subject, without something that calls out to be put into the world, without riding on the belief that nothing exactly the same has been in the world before, they might give up. Then they aren't writers. People sometimes ask writers if they're going to retire. You don't retire from writing any more than you retire from breathing. Perhaps at a certain point you can't do it anymore. For some people, what stops them from writing is whatever it is that stops them from breathing. For 10 months in 2022, that was how I lived. For 10 months, I didn't write a word that went into the world. I couldn't believe how easy it was. Writing is rooted in memory, in some alchemy of responses, particular to everyone, with no one's translation of life the same. My writing is rooted in a doubled memory. It's a memory of an actual incident, but inside that memory is a false memory, an attempt to remember something that can't be found. I was 10 in 1955. My family had just moved into a new house in Menlo Park, now famous as the site of the headquarters of Facebook, then famous for nothing. People might tell you it was named for the town in New Jersey where Thomas Edison invented the phonograph. In our house, in a library room where you could squirrel yourself off from everybody else, there was a big tube radio console, and I'd play with the radio at night, trying to pull in the drifting AM signals from stations across the country, from Salt Lake City, Cincinnati, even dance bands from hotels in New Jersey, as if that made some kind of loop back to where I was. One night, a few lines came out. Quote, "When American GIs left Korea," end of quote, the radio said, quote, "they also left behind countless fatherless babies. Once, everyone talked about this. Now, nobody cares." Those words bothered me at the time, but I put them out of my mind, or so I thought. For the next 20 years, that radio incident would reappear, crashing into whatever I was thinking like an invisible meteorite. As I got older, I realized this was an echo of something other than what the words on the radio actually described. I knew it was an echo of an absent memory, a phantom memory of my own father, whose name was Grail Gersley, who was lost in a typhoon in the Pacific when his destroyer went down. Those were all of the facts present at the time, and for so long after. No date, no details, no story. I was born Grail Gersley, but when those words came out of the radio, I wasn't Grail Gersley anymore. And although those words made me an echo chamber for the memory they called up, I had nothing to remember. The memory that was called up was silent and blank. Still, we all have memories of things we didn't experience, cultural memories that have taken up residence in our minds, built houses, filled them with furniture and appliances, and commanded that we live in them. I never saw Ty Cobb or Babe Ruth play, but they were as real to me growing up as President Eisenhower. I was raised with tales of their hero sagas, even the story of a great aunt who supposedly slept with Babe Ruth, even with the fact that when I was a baseball history mad 10-year-old, Ty Cobb himself lived in Menlo Park. Afraid he might spike me, I never knocked on his door. I did send him a postcard for an autograph, which he sent back with a signature so fresh-looking it could have been made in 1911, when my Baseball Hall of Fame book said he hit .420. Many years later, I found that his door was open. Friends of mine were at his house all the time, asking for the old-timer stories he was happy to tell. What I wouldn't give now to have had a little more nerve in 1955. These sorts of memories, these cultural memories, come to us from all sources, but especially from movies. There's that blank memory, but what explained it to me, as if it lay behind it, was one particular movie, David Lynch's Blue Velvet. The famous opening of this 1986 picture seems to parody the American fantasy of home, peace, quiet, and appliances. That is, the all but trademarked American dream. But that's what's most interesting about what's happening on the screen is that it may have no satiric meaning at all. The title sequence has shown a blue velvet curtain. swaying slightly from some silent breeze, casting back to the black and white velvet or satin backgrounds of the opening credits for 1940s B pictures. The theme music is ominous, alluring at first, suggesting Hitchcock's Vertigo. Then a quiet setting where predictability has replaced suspense. Then horns cutting off all hints of a happy ending. Bobby Vinton sings Blue Velvet, his soupy #1 hit from 1963, but with the sound hovering over slats of a white picket fence with red roses at their feet, the song no longer sounds soupy, or for that matter 23 years in the past. It sounds clean and timeless, just as the white of the fence and the red of the roses shot from below so that you look up at them as if at a flag, are so vivid you can barely see the objects for the colors. For an instant, the viewer is both visually and morally blinded by the intensity of the familiar. Defenses are stripped away. In slow motion, a fireman on a fire engine moving down a well-kept middle-class street waves at you, a warm smile on his moon face. Another picket fence, now with blazing yellow tulips. Children cross the street in an orderly manner as a middle-aged crossing guard holds up her sign again. Her stop sign. There is a house with a white picket fence and a middle-aged man watering the lawn. Inside the house, a middle-aged woman sits on a sofa. There's a Pierrot doll on the lamp behind her. She's drinking coffee and watching an old-fashioned television, a small screen and a blonde wooden box with legs, a set from the 1950s, when a TV was sold as a piece of furniture. In this case, an object reflecting values of taste and modesty, and also modest enough that the man in the yard might have made the box himself. A crime picture is on. The hand of a man carrying a gun crosses the screen. Outside, the man watering the lawn seems to sway with Bobby Vinton. The camera shows the faucet where the garden hose is attached, leaking spray. The hose catches on a branch. The sound of water coming from the hose and the faucet rises to a rumble that seems to be coming out of the ground. Every predictable gesture is about to shatter from the pressure the predictable is meant to hide. The man clutches his neck and falls to the ground. A dog rushes up, plants its forefeet on the groin of the prone man, and drinks from the spray. The rumble grows stronger. The camera goes down to the ground beneath the grass to reveal a charnel house, the secret world where armies of hideous beetles, symbols of human depravity, of men and women as creatures of absolute appetite, an appetite that banishes all conscience, appear to rise up and march out of the ground to take over the world like the ants and them. Then the hero finds an ear in a field, and the detective story that will take up the rest of the movie begins. But it's the pastoral that stays in the mind, not the nightmare bugs and the things are not as they seem. Rather, Lynch's portrayal of things as they ought to be feels too elegantly to gainsay. Rather, Lynch's portrayal of things as they ought to be feels too elegant to gainsay. It feels whole, not like a cheat. As an obvious contrivance, it carries its own reality. Because as a mock-up, it fixes the real street. For its moment, it feels like a step out of the theater and into an idea of real life. Watching the movie for a second or third time, you can see that the slightly stiff framing and timing of the firemen, the children, the crossing guard, the two bright images of fences and flowers, are a matter not of making the familiar strange, but of getting at how familiar the familiar actually is. The shots don't play like a dream, and they don't play like the beginning of an exciting new story. They play like memory, and they stay in the mind like a common memory laying itself over whatever personal memories a person watching might bring to the images. Because what the sequence seems to be showing is a proof that the notion of personal memory is false. The details of the sequence could perhaps be excavated to match specific details of David Lynch's own boyhood. But what is striking about these quiet, burningly intense images is that nothing in them is specific to anyone. They are specific, overwhelmingly specific, only as images of the United States. Anyone's memory is composed of both personal and common memories, and they are not separable. Memories of incidents that seem to have actually happened once in a particular time to you are colored, shaped, even determined, which is to say fixed in your memory by the affinities your personal memories have to common memories. Common memories as they are presented in textbooks and television programs, comic strips and movies, slang and clothes, all the rituals of everyday life as they are performed in one country, as opposed to the way they are performed somewhere else. The images that open Blue Velvet are images of things anyone watching a movie made in the USA can be presumed to have seen before, in actual experience or in TV shows, or for that matter, other movies, to have remembered as if they waved back at the firemen or picked up the hose. As if whatever it is that makes the image significant was determined by the person remembering it and no one else. But this is not true, and you can take it farther. If personal memory is false, what happens when you try to construct a memory of something that in fact you do not remember but should, that you desperately want to remember? I think I always knew that the words about the Korean orphans left behind and forgotten in the United States lay behind what I ended up doing with my life. Rewriting the past, pursuing an obsession with secret histories, with stories untold, with what to me were deep fraternal connections between people who never met or even heard of each other. Such people, as in my second book from 1989, as the Dadaist Richard Holzenbeck in Zurich in 1916, the essayist Guy Debord in Paris in 1954, and the punk singer Johnny Rotten in London in 1976. Once, a person interviewing me about that book, the poet Lorenzo Bush, asked me about some lines I'd written there. Quote, "Lost children seek their fathers, and fathers seek their lost children, but nobody really looks like anybody else. So all, fixed on the wrong faces, pass each other by," end of quote. He asked me if I was one of those sons or fathers. I told him that what he was quoting was one of those things any writer stumbles on, that I found those lines and kept them because they made sense of what I was trying to set out at that point in the book, with no personal motive. And then it was only later, rereading the passage, that I realized it was made up of the most autobiographical or confessional words in the book. I thought I was solving a problem on the page. I have a strong sense of privacy. In this case, I didn't want to reveal myself to myself, but instead I revealed myself to anyone who chose to read what I had written. Quote, "We think we know what we're doing," end of quote. The Brains sang in, quote, "Money Changes Everything," end of quote, 1978. They finished the line, quote, "We don't pull the strings," end of quote. One can, of course, remember what one hasn't experienced. Older people tell children, this is what he was like, this is the song he loved, this is how he laughed, how he walked, the team he rooted for. You absorb that. You meet the person who, in fact, you will never meet. And so that person, never present, becomes part of your memory. But in my case, none of that was true. I was born 6 months and a day after my father was killed in the Second World War. Legally born an orphan. I know that now, but growing up I never had a date to hold on to build from. My mother, born Eleanor Hyman, was from San Francisco. Grail Gersley in 1944, at 24, executive officer on the destroyer the Hull, second in command, was from Philadelphia. They hadn't known each other long when they married in San Francisco on September 7th. My mother went with my father to Seattle, where the Hull shipped out. I was left with the name, which became for me a talisman and a mystery. In 1948, my mother remarried to Gerald Marcus, the San Francisco lawyer who grew up in San Jose. And he adopted me, and my name was changed. I don't remember myself as Grail Gersley, but Grail was an inescapable name. I always had to explain it, but I really had nothing to tell. The story of the Hull was not told in my family. There were no pictures of my father, Grail Gersley, in my house. When I visited my Philadelphia family, there were pictures, but I felt furtive, unfaithful, criminal when I looked at them. And no one ever offered me a picture of my own to keep. There were memories. I was visiting my grandfather and my father's older brother and sister. There were letters my father wrote to other family members. In one, he described how Bing Crosby's recording of Blues in the Night was the only thing that got him through the day. There was even a professionally shot home movie showing my father in his dress Navy uniform, and the way he looked and the casual, commanding way he wore his dress Navy cap, so much a match now for John F. Kennedy that the footage is hard to look at. But none of that was shared with me. It must have been that to tell the story of who my father was, what he had done, what happened to him, and to so many others, would have been too much for a small boy to take on, or that to tell me such things would be somehow a breach of faith with my new father or with my mother in her new life. The situation never changed. When I grew older, the habit of not speaking about the past became a kind of prison. I didn't know how to break out of it. I didn't ask, and nobody told. My own daughters might ask my mother what it was like to have been married to someone else. I never could. Like many children, I sometimes fantasized that I was not the child of my parents. But in my case, it was at least half true, or more than half true. Though I always knew I had a different father than my brothers and my sister, if my father had lived, my mother would never have lived the life I came from. None of my siblings would have been born. When at first I asked about my father, she would say she didn't remember. Their time together had been so short, she said. The letters he wrote from the Hull, he was in charge of censoring mail, which meant he could say what he pleased, were thrown out. You might have told her that one night, preparing a navigation chart, he named a star after her. But if he did, she never told me. My mother gave her wedding book to her mother, and when, sometime in the mid-1950s, my grandmother took it out and paged through it with me, she told me never to tell my mother she had showed it to me. So in times of childhood or teenage unhappiness, the fantasy that I might have lived a different life, been a different person with a different name, was more a fact than a fantasy. But it was the kind of fact that when you try to hold on to it, slips through your fingers like water. So I developed my obsession with the past. I read the history books in the landmark book series From the First Men in the World by Anne Terry White in 1953 to The Witchcraft of Salem Village by Shirley Jackson in 1956 and on from there. They were hardback books. They probably cost about $1.50. I'd read one in a day and then I'd read it again. I used the cultivated mystery of my own past as a spur to reconstructing events as they happened and as they didn't, as they might have. This is always the route I've traveled, whether writing about Elvis Presley or Bill Clinton, Bob Dylan or Huey Long, about the life Robert Johnson might have lived if he hadn't been murdered in Mississippi in 1938, the life the Houston blues singer Geeshie Wiley would have lived if she hadn't disappeared not long after she made records in 1930, about John Wayne and Rio Bravo or Frank Sinatra and the Manchurian Candidate, events as they happened and as they didn't. When in 1964 at 19, during the free speech movement at Berkeley, when it seemed everyone was reading Camus' The Rebel, somebody handed me a copy, the 1956 vintage paperback edition, and I was instantly transfixed. I was staring at the cover. I tried to stare into it. My own unintelligible sense of history, never put into words, never fixed in an image, was staring back at me. A black and white drawing by the children book illustrator Leo Leone, black and gray really, showed a crumpled newspaper blowing in the wind. There were unreadable headlines and stories in different languages and alphabets smeared on the single front page. Quote, "If finally the conquerors succeed in molding the world according to their laws, it will not prove that quantity is king, but that this world is hell." End of quote. Camus wrote in that book. Quote, "In this hell, the place of art will coincide with that of vanquished rebellions, a blind and empty hope in the pit of despair." Ernst Dwinger in his Siberian diary mentions a German lieutenant, for years a prisoner in a camp where cold and hunger were almost unbearable, who constructed himself a silent piano with wooden keys. In the most abject misery, perpetually surrounded by a ragged mob, he composed a strange music which was audible to him alone. And for those of us who have been thrown into hell, mysterious melodies and the torturing images of a vanished beauty will always bring us, in the midst of crime and folly, the echo of that harmonious insurrection which bears witness throughout the centuries to the greatness of humanity. End of quote. Except for that story, the picture on the cover stayed with me with more force and poetry than any sentences or ideas from the book itself. That drawing was history to me. It was language. It It was real life as it happens, a paper flying down the street with headlines of rebellions and refusals and battles and defeats, blowing out of reach. You can see someone chasing the sheet down the street as if it were the last bit of written evidence of the story of its times, full of sound and fury, gone with the wind, all the assassinations, massacres, failed social experiments, poetic negations, all the raised and dashed hopes of the century that left only these illegible traces in the world, which is somehow not nothing. Quote, Shahid watched his lover across the bookshop, a spacious place on 2 floors, with the stock displayed on huge tables. In the past, bookstores had always been so dingy, end of quote. Hanif Qureshi wrote in his novel, The Black Album. Seeing the piles, quote, seeing the piles of new volumes, Shahid wanted to snatch them up, not knowing how he'd survived without them. Dee Dee bought lipstick traces, and he followed her to the till, awaiting the bookmark and bag, end of quote. I never expected my untold story to actually appear as real life, to challenge as real life the fantasy that has always been the foundation for whatever it is I write.